in a medium-term sense, the more able to seize some political opening, which we don't know, that could come this winter, that could come in the spring, that could come in 3, 4, 8, 10, we don't know. But the more likely we'll be to grab it. So in order to win now in society, to make our voices heard, have a chance to really make really fundamental change, I argue for this block.
No, James, thanks for being so disciplined. And I would recommend this book also for its openness. I mean, in some ways, the language of our block and how do we win sounds a bit military, but actually a bit sort of tidy and tight. But actually, it's a very open book about, it's not, as James said, it's not about in or out of the Labour Party. It even doesn't take for granted the Labour Party's, continued existence. It's very open, and I think that's really important. And I think this notion of sort of there will come a moment is sort of, maybe we should not just think of it like that, because I think what Sheila and others will be arguing about is actually how that moment, and whether or not there is a moment, is shaped a lot by what's happening in society at the base. And I think that's why it's really great that we've got Sheila here, who's been a campaign organizer at a really base level for like decades. Sheila.
Thank you. I'd also recommend James's book. It's very readable, and I'd say it's you can do it. You could do it in one reading if you're sitting indulging with a cup of coffee, over a few hours. Some really good things in it. I'm going to start off with a quote. I'm kind of, set the cat amongst the pigeons, but I'm kind of, I never do anything to be popular. This is a quote from, this is actually a tweet from someone who tweeted on Saturday night. And I've written it down, but I've also got it here. I'm sure the posh London left of the World Transformed will put on some decent events this weekend. However, until the Ketwigs and Scallies of Huyton, Norris Green, Toxteth, etc. are engaged and find something progressive they can relate to politically and socially, then ain't nobody transforming shit. Now, I actually know who did that tweet. It wasn't me. I wouldn't have put it so eloquently. But it's room for thought, because that is a young black person from the city who is engaged in a lot of things, but is also wise enough to know that people aren't engaged. And that really is my concern. How do you get people engaged? And Hilary is right. It has to be, I think, at the level of what relates to their life. You can't come in with the best intentions in the world, and I'm probably the worst who thinks I can do that, and say, no, this is good, you have to do this. It has to touch people in some way. And as has been said, I was involved for many years around researching the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster. And I kind of did the classic thing of moving from being an academic researching it to actually being the activist on the street with it all. And in for the long haul. It was a marathon, it wasn't a sprint. We're talking 30 odd years. And so I saw how people organised, or the lack of organisation. And the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, to which Hilary referred, began 9 years after the disaster. Now that's a disastrous time to start a campaign from the original event. And I had doubts where it was going. But it grew out of disgruntled, bereaved families who were in a family support group that didn't support them. And it grew out of survivors who weren't included in any group whatsoever. And what people like myself were able to give it was a structure, but it was a structure based on what they wanted. So, for example, I kept saying to them, well, what's your aims and objectives? What do you mean? What do you want? And I was really quite strong about making sure we wrote down what the aims and objectives were. And over the years, that became one of the most important things, because I'd go, well, hang on a minute, aren't you diverting a bit from what you really want? Because there were so many diversions, and there were state diversions. The Sun newspaper was a diversion. Oh, let's get them boycotting the Sun. Now, I'm part of that and have been for years and very proud of it. But the Sun didn't kill anyone at Hillsborough, and it was a diversion away from the real perpetrators. So for me, that was so important. Our campaign still exists in that it still offers the main case for it now is involving helping people with therapy, psychiatric, psychology therapies, because people are messed up and people are damaged over many years, and the state colluded in that damage, hence why there are cases ongoing now for trauma and damage. The important thing there is, and I am a bit of a purist, so I know I drive people mad, but for me, as a campaign, our strength diminished once lawyers got involved. Once it went legal, where people listened to us, and they only listened to us because we kicked doors down. We did all sorts of things, which there's no time to go into, but those of you who are activists know what you have to do. We broke a few rules along the way, and I'm glad I did, and was prepared to take those risks. When the lawyers got involved, it becomes a process of negotiation. So when we got the new inquest, for example, whilst that seemed brilliant, nevertheless, the real issue was truth goes out the window because you negotiate what can come in, stay in, what can go out, etc. And that was very frustrating and damaging to some of the families, even though you got the result. I know families so traumatized that the real issue they wanted raising, some of it real personal, awful stuff, and relevant, was negotiated out. My sadness over it, if I'm to say, which is actually, I've got a lot of negatives around it, which I won't go into, but it's the lack of political growth. It grew out of working class people. Our campaign grew out of the disgruntled, disenfranchised working class people in the family support group who had an innate distrust of the police and the establishment, so you could work with them. And along the way, it brought lots of others. But the minute it kind of all went mainstream, you got the academics, you got the lawyers falling over themselves to want a piece of it. And the sad thing for me around Hillsborough generally, not just the family support group, is how people were seduced by politicians putting their arms around them and claiming what they did for Hillsborough, when the reality is they did fuck all over many years. This was never party political. In fact, being brutally honest, the Tories gave Hillsborough more than Labour ever did. Labour was never a friend to the victims of Hillsborough. We go back to Jack Straw in opposition. Jack Straw, when Labour was in power, absolutely appalling what he did. So there's a real distrust, and for me, there's a hardcore of people who were politicised, but in the main, people are content to be mates with, I won't name them, but certain MPs and elected mayors, and happy to sit in a director's box at Anfield, and that to me is really sad. So that's kind of my cynicism around Hillsborough, but not all, and I have some very dear friends. And the sad thing is most of the people I was closest with and worked most closely with are dead, and that's the reality of real campaigning. You sacrifice your own health, your own life. And that is the point at which I get very angry when people who should be here speaking instead of me can't because they're dead. To move on, more relevant to, and that's an example of grassroots working class campaign and how we impacted in the area. We were close to the football ground, close to Anfield, and how we helped other people. But if we go back to Jeremy Corbyn, I only joined the Labour Party to support Corbyn. I just felt there was something. I've always operated from outside. I've always felt that's where my strength is. But when Corbyn was elected leader, there was a chance. You saw it, the energy, the movement. You saw young people who'd never been involved in anything. Just talking about this city, for example, the energy and kids coming out and joining and wanting to be involved. And some of you might remember the event at Tranmere, which the Jeremy Corbyn grew out of, the music event at which he was brought on. Well, that was my idea, and it was my idea it wasn't based around Corbyn. My idea around it was to get a platform at that music event to encourage the young people there to register to vote, because it was around voter registration. You can support Corbyn all you want, but if you're not registered. So that was my plan. And my son was the organiser of the music event. So I nobbled him, and he went, I don't know if it's going to come off because the owners are Tories and whatever. But anyway, between us, we did it, and with close contact with Corbyn's office. And there was a lot of, not everyone liked the idea of it, whatever. Were you there, James? Yeah. And we even had politics on the day that a band refused to introduce Corbyn because they didn't want to be seen to be party political. And the person who introduced him was John McClure from Reverend and the Makers, and a wonderful person who went, oh, he can have my slot, I won't even play. He was absolutely brilliant. But what I'm saying is, that the point in all that is, that grew out, not of some big organising from a central office. It grew out of a local idea. And we exploited that. People were there. And we took a gamble, because that could have gone one or two ways. People could have gone, I'm here for the music. I'm not here to listen to some politician. As it was, he got this, amazing response, which was just fabulous, and it grew and grew. He ends up at Glastonbury, whatever. I should have signed him up that day, shouldn't I? So that to me is how you can begin organising. I was just like broken-hearted when all, kind of the everything went wrong around Corbyn, and we can long debate that. The important thing is that what do you do about that? Because following on from that, people drifted away. People drifted away totally, and it's sad that that level of organising, I think, is largely lost, and we might debate that, but I think it's largely lost. Certainly lost to the Labour Party, and at the moment, I don't know that's any bad thing, because people have gone into other areas, as James has mentioned, and that is what, to me, is so important. In my day job, I am actually a coordinator for Unite Community regionally, and I have frustrations with that, because trying to operate on a community level within the structures of a traditional trade union is not easy, because you can't fit square pegs in round holes, and the lack. The union is basically industrial, so trying to do all that. And James refers to it in his book, and it's really interesting how James sees, you get people involved, and he refers to Unite Community, and I'd like to talk to him about that again. But I'd just like to say the only thing I've been involved with on any serious level since is a group called Beacon, and I kind of come together with people I knew, and I knew some of them from the poll tax stuff years ago, and I knew some of them from the football and Spirit of Shankly, and we came together. And our idea was to operate on a municipal level and get into communities rather than, sort of try and get someone into the council, whatever. Having said that, there was a by-election last year, and we stood people. And we stood people because, we stood one person, because it was the area I'd grown up in and these other people had grown up in. So we were known in the area, a rough working class area in North Liverpool. And we just got out on the streets for 3 weeks, and we came second. Labour were always going to get in. They got someone in. Anyway, I won't go into all that, because I'm sure you all know the mechanics and the machinations of how Labour Party get people into seats. And we were like, do we want to do that or not? Do we want to really blitz it? Because I firmly believe we could take that area next time, and we could take a few more working class areas. But yesterday, we had a meeting with, and some people here today, with Power to the People, Glasgow, because one of the things we agreed to launch in Liverpool recently was Power to the People, and actually try and organise around the energy crisis. And it was such a useful meeting yesterday, because we, it shared experiences and a wealth of experience, but also about people saying, not that they won't pay, but they can't pay. And the thing is that, don't encourage people not to pay. Help the people who can't pay, and don't leave the vulnerable even more vulnerable. And that is something you really have to be wary of. But also, educate people around managing debt. We had 8 people from Acorn there, brilliant. Let's stop evictions, let's physically stop them. So it was a meeting of both how you educate people, how you get into communities, and how you defend communities sometimes with physical force. Now, I think that's brilliant, and I hope we really, build on that and grow on that. That can't be done at the moment through the Labour Party. I mean, and I've got no affiliations. I'm expelled from the party, as you might be, imagine. And anyone who watched, the Al Jazeera over the last couple of nights, appalling. And people, James, very good, sorry on it. But like good people I know, people who've done so much, people like Rika Baird, people who've done so much in the community and been around for years, to be treated the way they're treated with blatant lies. And so it's that world, isn't it, where lies are believed, and and I can't operate from that. I'm a good convent girl, truth matters to me. That Catholicism never leaves you. So the point is, you go to hell if you tell lies. My mother always instilled in me. So I'm being frivolous about that, but those sorts of values, they're not bad values to have. Truth matters, and truth became the enemy of some in the Labour Party, and that's what I found hardest. And so I can't operate. I would never knock on a door for Labour in the foreseeable future. I am totally into groups coming together, and I would do what I can within Unite Community in terms of my job, but also in terms of a grassroots campaign, working within communities. I know from being on the doorstep and knocking what people are saying. They need people. People do want something, but they want it within the community. And what people are saying is so profound sometimes, but they don't know how to channel it. That's the job of people like us who have those skills to train and direct people in the right direction. But people have to control their own destiny, and you can't do that by coming in and telling them what to do. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. That was great and brings up a lot of issues that will run through the discussion, including that whole issue of how far you can have national impact without being sucked into the dominant institutions and weakened by doing so. And I think all the issues you raise about community organising also raise issues of what leadership means at a community level, and how the process of moving from one community to a wider sort of perspective. So with those questions, I'll go over to Sasha Josette, who's had this double experience of being in the community organising unit inside the Labour Party, and then that being closed down, and now being involved in an independent community organising for social justice, climate justice. So Sasha.
Thank you. That's a really, really hard act to follow. I should have gone first. So I did have a role in the community organising unit. I'm not going to go too much into it because you can read it, all about it, in James's book already. And also, I'm actually probably still quite traumatised from the whole experience of being in the Labour Party. So I'm not going to go too into that, but I will say that after the general election defeat, when we first saw those exit polls coming in, and thought, fuck, what are we going to do now? And then after I finished crying, sleeping, raging loads, lots and lots of raging, and then crying a bit more, started to get to the point of thinking, okay, what do we do next? Because actually as a community organiser, all the relationships that we've built throughout, maybe not just within the time in the community organising team, but outside of that within Momentum and activism that we were all doing during that time, those relationships and trust that we built were still there. Those people that we worked with are still out there. And how do we continue this work? And amazingly, thankfully, we're drawn towards a group of other people who were feeling the same way, who had also finished the process of grieving and raging, and started to think about, okay, so how do we, firstly, what is the movement looking like right now, particularly with a climate focus? We'd all been involved in the climate movement in the run-up to the election. I was specifically involved with working with Becky Long-Bailey's policy team on the community organising and movement building around their policy. And so that how do we learn from this beautiful work that happened inside the party and take it back out into the community? alongside other co-founders, so this is before we even had a name, which is Breathe, by the way, but before we even had a name, so people from Wretched of the Earth, from who had been working in Labour for Green New Deal, with more policy stuff, from like just across the climate movement, and myself, who came together to kind of really start looking at what community organising for climate justice could look like. And also seeing that actually when we started doing, I guess you could call it a power mapping, but for us it was just like, where is our place in the movement now? That we all came actually from quite a lot of trauma. We were burnt out. We had felt extracted from. We were starting to question what our place was, and started to see, okay, we've got this like lots of mobilizing, the resist and fight back, you know, the kind of protest movement. There's a lot of work going on there. There's also a lot of burnout going on there, activists who just like keep going and going and going, like you said earlier, you know, it's just like you keep moving towards that crisis point and people burn out and they've left the movement, and what are we going to do about that? And then we've got the kind of the state power, like the work that was going into there. And then we looked at, well, what's the bottom? Where's the infrastructure underneath all that? That felt really undernourished, and there wasn't enough work. You know, the place where we kind of imagine the world as we want it to be, the deep community organising in working class communities around the country, like where was that work happening? And there is a lot of work happening there. And we also felt that our place where we wanted to focus was in this space. And it's not saying that means that you have to leave or not leave the Labour Party. It's not saying you do organising versus mobilising. It's kind of like taking away all those adversarial questions and looking at an overall ecosystem, because actually every single part of the movement is important and needs to be nourished, and it needs to have strategic alignment in order for us to win change. So we're kind of focusing on this particular area. Before we even had a name, we also spent about a year of our time just thinking about, considering the kind of trauma we'd all come out of the election feeling, how do we make sure that the organising methodology that we were using and the organising infrastructure in terms of our project didn't replicate what actually felt like patriarchal capitalistic structures within the left. We didn't want to do that. So we spent maybe a year actually looking at reclaiming care and resistance as political strategy, and kind of really embedding that inside our organisation, as well as ensuring that that becomes part of our organising methodology, which was quite difficult to do because actually there wasn't a lot to lean on in terms of like the community organising training and methodology. So we kind of had to really expand and look at what other movements around the world were doing, really, really kind of, well, lucky enough to kind of be a part of a fellowship of other women, black and brown organisers from around the world who were doing a similar thinking. So really looking at the feminist Chilean movement that led up to some of the interesting wins that we're seeing today. But also were able to kind of talk us through how you then deal with the fight back along the way, and made us realise that these community coalition spaces were so important, because we also had to look at increased state intervention, increased policing and police violence. And when we're looking at the climate crisis, we're looking at catastrophe, so we need these like solidarity spaces, mutual aid spaces, where a really diverse selection of the community came together to create these spaces. So we now have, rolling on, we now have organisers in Glasgow, in Stoke, starting next week, with a focus on looking at how do we use community organising methodology to intervene in to take up more space rather than intervene, take up more space than the organised far right do in Stoke, and look at the framing around climate denialism, and look at the framing around even like some of the organised far right still are accepting that there is a climate crisis, but are still homophobic, transphobic, and anti-migrant. So we're looking at actually a kind of perfect storm for eco-fascism in our communities. So how can we use this methodology to kind of push back against that and hopefully bring more people with us whilst meeting them where they're at without polarizing the debate. And we also have another organizer in Birmingham who is on a community, I guess you could describe it as community wealth build, a grassroots community wealth building projects. So he works on a declining high street, bringing the community, everybody who walks through, uses the buses, like anyone who interacts with this declining high street, to come together to build a community coalition to look at how we redistribute the wealth back into the local community, whether that is worker-led, community-owned co-ops, energy co-ops. It could be taking over the local pub. It could be, what I would really love to see in all of our projects is community-owned, worker-led media co-ops. And we've got Newcastle as well, which is just starting, which is potentially looking like exploring the climate crisis and health. So that's quite a lot for 1 year, I think. I think we'll probably stop there for a little bit and then hopefully build out a bit more next year. So that's what we're doing right now.
Brilliant. Well, it's good to hear that this ecosystem is growing so rapidly. and I think there are a lot of other people here who are involved in that ecosystem. I mean, the next speaker, Lydia, is involved in the union workplace organising, which is obviously a crucial part of that ecosystem. But there are also other people here in the meeting. I know there's Francis Northrop here, I think, who's very involved in economic initiatives. So I think all your discussion at the end about community wealth building of a sort that doesn't depend entirely on local government, but is also community initiated, though might require, well, probably will require political support. So later in the discussion, we really want you all to draw on your own experiences as well as respond to the speakers. So the next speaker, and also pose some questions to James, who'll do a final kind of response, is Lydia Hughes, who's co-editor of Pepper, and who used to be, as I said earlier, the former head. So the next speaker,
is this one working?
No, okay. Okay, so, well, is this working? Okay. I think you've got to sort of kiss it somehow. But I'm not Mick Jagger. Anyway, the next speaker is Lydia Hughes, sorry, who, as well as being a co-editor of Red Pepper, was the former head of organising at the Independent Workers of Great Britain Union. So I want her particularly to reflect on that experiences and then to pose some questions to James. Thanks, Lydia. Sorry for a slightly messed up intro.
No, that was great. Now I feel like I have to kiss this microphone or something. I don't know what's going on. I'm not Mick Jagger either, I'm afraid. Can you hear me, though? Is this okay? Okay, great. How's everyone feeling? Third day of TWT, few tired faces. Woo! It's great. It's going amazing. I'm loving this weekend. First, I just want to start to say thank you to Hilary for bringing us all together. And thank you to James for writing the book. I really feel like, I'm sure my fellow grassroots organisers can attest to the fact that often we are just head down, working incredibly hard, totally in the weeds. And it's really important to have these spaces where we have a chance to just take a step back and think with ambition. And to say a few good words about the book, one thing I really appreciate is the ambition. We're creating a vision. Something that we can make a reality. And another thing I really appreciated was the urgency. I'm sure we all feel it at the moment. We're facing down the barrel of the gun of a climate collapse. And especially in the union movement, it's a sink or swim moment. Liz Truss has promised to smash the labour movement in her first 30 days. So we're all going to be very busy. But what Hilary asked us to address was, what is the distinctive role of grassroots organising for any strategy for socialist change in Britain? And as Hilary said, my experience is in union organising, in worker organising. I've had experience in other social movements, but found with worker organising, we have an incredibly unique sense or source of power. Who here has ever had a job? Put your hand up. Has anyone had a job before? Yeah, I've got a job. One of those things you got to do. Who's been in a union? Now I know who to harass at the end. Who hasn't got their hands up. It might not always feel like it, but work is where most of us come into the closest and most direct conflict with capitalism. It's where, when we act together, we have the ability to bring capitalism to its knees. Feels maybe quite far off right now, but it's possible. And I really feel that if we're organised enough, we really can demand anything. For years, we've been very bogged down in pay or terms and conditions, and that's exactly where the government wants us. That's how they've legislated us into that little corner. But one thing I appreciate from the idea of a coalition is the idea of bringing broader perspectives into the union movement. There's absolutely no reason, maybe apart from that little thing called the law, that why we can't use our power at work for anything, for housing struggles, immigration struggles, struggles over benefits. But for this conversation today, I think it's really important to discuss where our power comes from in the workplace. And it's as we discuss with the grassroots in the unions, it's at that real rank and file level where we build our power to fight back. Unions may have political power. We talk about unions as if it's one big entity. Unite or Unison may have lots of money. They may have the ear of some ministers or politicians. But only at that level of the workplace, everyone who put their hands up who've ever had a job, we have the ability to use our power as workers to withdraw our work or to go slow or work to rule. And one thing that struck me when I was reading the book was the discussion about creating parallel forms of power to the existing apparatus. Once we start to get together in our workplace, as we're seeing amazingly this summer, we're starting to build those networks of reps and shop stewards who are coming together and forming those powerful cross-union and cross-workplace coalitions. We can begin to act independently of institutions. We can begin to form that power that you talk about in the book so well. But the real challenge that struck me when I was reading the book was, is this a coalition that's going to be from above? Or is it one that's going to form from below, especially when it comes to unions? We have this long history in the labour movement of starting campaigns and Unite or Unison or USDOR sign up to the campaign and they have a logo on their website. But what does this actually mean? It doesn't mean that every Unite member or Unison member or USDOR member is on board with the campaign. And it definitely doesn't mean that every member is going to be taking action for the issue. So one thing we really want to see is that mass participation. And when thinking how to do that, I'm thinking through how do we harness that real power that we have in the workplace, that power that this left bloc needs. And really we need to go with this left bloc to win that argument with every Unite member or Unison member or USDOR member. And that brings us to an important principle. Hilary also asked us to look at what principles we would take forward into this bloc. And democracy is such an important one, not just as an abstract principle that's fantastic in its own right, but a really practical principle too. This is one that we use in our organising a lot. And using democracy as an organising tool means that we can build towards real action. And through action, we can create amazing forms of solidarity. So coming back to Hilary's questions about the principles, my real conclusion from the book was that the principles that we can take forward into it are democracy, this from below organising, mass participation, and finally action, which is great. Shall I go into a question? Yeah. Okay. Well, I have loads of questions, actually. But knowing now that we want to have some actual mass participation in the room, I won't get in the way of that. So my one question that I wanted to put to James was, what does it mean building this left bloc, this coalition for the average office worker or Greg's worker or courier? How can they get involved in it? And how would it strengthen their organising? So I'll let you lead on that really easy question.
If you were going to ask one question, it should be that. That's definitely the best question. So I think that any coalition is not from below or from above. It needs to operate at, I think, 3 different levels for it to be successful. So, and I mean, this isn't a clever thing. This is just what happens anyway. If you look at anything, you know, this is how it happens. So you've got 3 levels. There's the grassroots level of the people who are actually doing things, and there you'll find, like, who in this room is only a member of one organisation and only does activism in one particular type of way? Any hands going up? Right. So actually, when people are themselves doing things, whether in their workplace, their community, whatever they're in, so you naturally get, or there's the natural capacity for some kind of coalitional thing. Then there's the second level, which is actions that lots of people are taking. So if you're getting a lot of strikes, or a lot of protests, or a lot of people boycotting something, or a lot of people occupying something, or major national campaigns, those are things which can bring together people in their different clusters at different levels. And then you do need, I think, at the top level, for coordination, so that you know, you're not having big national demonstration called by one bit of our movement on exactly the same time as another bit of it, in, you know, which pulls in different directions. Or if they are going to have it on the same day, it's more than the sum of the parts, not less than the sum of their parts. So, as the preamble to that, what does it mean for how's it going to make people more powerful? Well, I think that if at the community level, any strike from, Greg's is relatively good employer because they recognise the Bakers Union, but let's say that any struggle that is, you were IWGB before, let's say there's some kind of semi-strike against someone, if that is bringing in other demands, the local tenants union, for example, and then that can expand out, I think on the grassroots level you can see how that can work. And then on the larger level, going back to the example of this Saturday, quite a few people are going to be out on strike. Quite a few people are going to be out protesting a variety of different things. If people can see for themselves that the people that are, occupying X because they don't want fracking are doing the same thing as them, that will mean something to them. That will make them more powerful.
Okay, that's great. So I think everybody, if there's anything like my response to all this, I'm sort of bursting with questions and ideas. So I think rather than immediately go into, individual questions, it'd be quite good if people could just talk with each other. I think more than just to their immediate neighbour, who might be a very close friend. So it's not much advance to sort of just chat to them. So if you could sort of just arrange little clusters and chat about what you've heard. I mean, I did have some questions, but they keep changing in my mind at any rate. Well, one is, what's distinctive? What's the distinctive role of grassroots organising? Meaning, there's lots of different ways of organising politically. Okay, so these are just sort of stimuli. So one is, as Lydia has said, what's the distinctive role of grassroots organising? Often people make a gesture about the need for the movement, the needs for grassroots organising, without much sort of deep discussion about what is it about grassroots organising that makes it particularly transformative compared to, say, electoral organising or, other kinds of national political organising. And so the other one is, how can it have national influence? Often grassroots organising is very particular. It has to be, like Sheila was saying, it has to start from where people are at, which is often very personal and very direct. How can it move forward? How can it have a national impact? What kinds of resources? What kind of infrastructure? What kinds of leadership? What kinds of connections across vertically, as it were, horizontally and vertically, can give it that national influence, including what kind of connections with the media, what kind of new media are needed. And then finally, is it possible to work within national or even local, in institutions, within sort of established institutions like local councils, Parliament, the Labour Party, unions, without being sort of drawn in and weakened in the process. So those are just some questions. So if you can just maybe 15, 20 minutes in those discussions, and then I think rather than have formal report backs, we'll open it up. So do we want to start here? So Mika, could you introduce yourself and then be brief? Could people be brief?
Sorry,
my name is Mika Nava, and I've been active in the women's movement and in a university and in sort of local stuff. And I did have reservations about the questions that were set, because I thought there were real problems. What does grassroots organising isn't a good thing in itself. And one of the negative problems, for example, is you can imagine the people in Dover who are overwhelmed by the numbers of migrants who are coming through, who are grassroots organising in a way that most of us here would not approve of at all. So grassroots isn't in itself a good thing. And so how, without context, without meaning, without history, really the questions are very, very difficult to respond to. That was really, I think, what we thought here, but maybe somebody else would like to add to that.
Okay. Good point. Any other group wanting to respond?
Shazara, yeah, I'm doing it. Please
Okay.
hold the mic right up to your mouths, everyone, so you can catch.
We thought that grassroots organising involved developing personal relationships that give you strength in political struggle, and also that it's important for them to be based in some real issue that's affecting the community or the workplace. That's so it starts from that, and also that it doesn't exclude people, like that you can't go to a Labour CLP meeting unless you're a delegate or things like that. That it's inclusive. So that was on point one, and we thought that about national influence. It's really about those basic issues that that the community organising, the grassroots organising is based on. That is going to have echoes in other parts of the country, and that there will always be similar groups, and that builds up a momentum to try to, and maybe that's the role of James's sort of managing committee, if you like, that somehow puts those groups in touch with one another. And I think it stems from what we said about the role of grassroots organising, that in a sense it can't work with existing institutions that systematically exclude people or expel them. But obviously it can have relation and be inclusive of people who are within those existing institutions. We thought a good example that's going to be relevant over the next few months is the right to food, which is going to be an issue for people in communities across the country. Thanks.
Okay, so this is my first time at an event like this, so it's all quite new to me. But for the role and principles of grassroots organizations, we felt that they should be community-based, definitely having a purpose and or need, especially reaching out to vulnerable populations that need help. And they should grow and originate in an organic manner, especially those removing barriers to engagement for those communities. to have national influence from a grassroots level. What does help to have national relevance is generalizability to the rest of the country or globe even, and whether it's injustice or it's similar socioeconomic deprivation projects that can connect with other projects around the country, and how to sort of facilitate that if we have common ground and respect of differing opinions and differing communities that, are concrete in their ideas and aims. And we did summarize that it is with great difficulty that grassroots organizations can have national relevance. We did agree that a lot of going from grassroots or to national relevance is quite difficult, so you need a lot of energies, time, funding even, and structure. So we didn't even know about question 3, but we sort of segued onto that, in that if we can use structures such as trade unions, tenants associations, particularly trade unions that can and should help their users, not just in an employment predicament. Going from the tenants associations that, like being flexible and having actions of mobilization within different groups that can enforce changes, and I think, as James mentioned, sort of seizing the moment at the time and rolling with that. So, yeah.
Okay, there's some other groups that haven't fed back, and then we'll get comments from everybody. I'll just say that all this is being recorded, so this isn't the end of the discussion. The idea is that this debate will carry on through Red Pepper and probably other organisations as well, so that all that you've been saying and the questions and criticisms you've been raising will be, part of that debate. Who's next?
Hello everyone, my name's Dodo. It's a pleasure to meet you all. We had a discussion. I was maybe lobbying my group a little bit hard on a position, and so there was a bit of a pushback against. I was arguing if that's fair. And that position was that I worry about this trade-off between community organising or the long journey of building the bloc and the electoral project, because I think that in a way an electoral project gives teeth to a lot of the organising that is done, and that they feed into each other very well, with the community organising acting as a strategy for that political project. And I was quite concerned that perhaps we're maybe missing a moment, because the cost of living crisis has really changed the material conditions in this country, and that really is a potential trigger, I think, for something bold and something new to come up. And that really, without having leverage against the Labour right, we could be heading into a Starmer government, and we could actually miss a real window of opportunity for a new project to be formed. So really, it was this thing of electoralism versus a kind of community organising and grassroots politics. To me, don't seem like there's things that stand against each other. So it's a both rather than either option for me. And I guess the group was kind of suggesting that maybe that had a kind of a blind look at where power lies, and saying, like, where does power lie? Is it within the community? Is it within Westminster? And there was some pushback to say, well, actually, there's many places that you can locate power within the UK. And I would say that is very true, but it is definitely both. And I don't think we can step back from the political space for too long. And I really hope that we do get together and come up with this bold electoral project, because I do think everything we're talking about does feed into that.
Okay. I want to say something. I'm probably abusing the chair, but I want to say something in response to that, which is, or it's really putting it as a question, which I think is okay from the chair, which is, is it possible to have a national political project that isn't entirely electoral? I mean, I think I'm sort of wanting to stand back a bit from the idea that that we're waiting for an electoral opportunity. Aren't there other ways of giving a national political focus to our work, and particularly if our work has been primarily of a transformative grassroots character, you know, bearing in mind the qualifications that Mika's made about grassroots in itself isn't sort of necessarily transformative in a progressive way, but couldn't we be thinking about a national, was my question to James really, about a national political project that's not translated into purely electoral politics and representative democracy, but has got a participatory national focus? I mean, in a way, you could say the positive moment in Chile before the recent defeat of the constitutional referendum was that movement around a new constitution. I mean, it wasn't electoral, it was actually about transforming the political institutions. It was a national focus, no doubt. But anyway, that's a question. But there's some more groups to speak from the floor. Connor.
So I suppose it's in response to like the first question. We didn't really answer it, but here's a contribution about like the essential principles of grassroots organising. When we talk about community organising, I often wonder who are the community, right? So to illustrate what I mean through like personal experience, I joined the Labour Party in 2015 to vote for Corbyn. I was 17, I was still in school, then I went to university, then I graduated, now I'm in work. And like that's quite a transitory period. Like people I knew at school and was friends with, I generally don't see anymore because they've had to move away for work. Ditto people at university. And like, it's quite atomizing because everyone has to move around for employment. There's not really any sense of rooted togetherness around geographic space in a way that I think there might have been in the past with like mining villages or, you know, parts of urban centres that have been gentrified or through employment with trade unions that have largely been eviscerated by capitalism. Like when we talk about the community, you know, what actually is the essence of community? Well, it's people who have personal relations with one another, and that takes a lot of time and effort to both build and maintain and not lose touch with people. It's like, I suppose a wonky sociological term would be like, it's a lot of affective investment. And yeah, it's basically like the question I'm sort of posing back to you is like, when we're trying to build community and organize it, how do you actually like get people to have a shared sense of commonality and identity and togetherness that can be useful and socially productive for like socialist politics?
Great, Connor. Any other questions and points? Sorry? There's some people there.
And at the back as well. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we touched on a few principles. Started with cooperative principles. People involved in the co-op movement. We touched.
Can you speak up?
Can you hear me? We started with the cooperative principles and values, and that briefly touched on ideas around role replacement as well, and leadership and ideas. You know, the chair doesn't always have to be the chair for 20 years and control the whole organisation with their family, and it's their organisation now, and now it's a business, and they're making a pretty penny out of it. I've lived in Liverpool 30 years. It's everywhere. You know, people taking control of community-based organisations and running with them. It's like, really? That's a family business. That's not a community organisation. Anyway, sorry, I died. We spoke about inclusivity, intersectionality. We spoke about the idea as well of, and it's something I picked up from another session, being it's stuff that touches people's lives, obviously, but and it being rooted. But the idea of it being often oppositional rather than, or the challenge of it being propositional can be challenging. So, and that can involve the need for knowledge sharing, which we touched on. Knowledge sharing as in people knowing their rights or demanding rights that are not yet in a legal framework, which touches on the broader pictures, demands that are not part of a legal or policy framework. And is it about feeding them up? Or I'm sort of crossing over different questions. Clear aims and objectives and goals was picked up. The principles around respect, being humble, being prepared to listen, Empowerment being a key principle, empowering each other, and that's sort of where bottom up meets top down, isn't it? That empowerment, empowering, who's empowering who, and that touches on the politics of representation, which is the next bit around national influence. We touched on from someone in the group from Barcelona around translocalism. So does the national have to even be a focus?
Oh, okay.
And that's not just in a European context, that's in a global context. You know, we are connected now.
Could you wind up?
We are connected other than through geography. We touched on, in terms of national influence, ripple effect. Depends on the energy people put in. Is there a need for coordination? We spoke about, what else, sorry.
Could we probably need to move on.
That was about it.
Okay, great. That's great. So, okay. So there's I think a group at the back's been having their hands up for a long time. And we are going to have to wind up quickly after a response from as many of the panel as want to respond.
Hello. Sorry about my compatriots. We talked an awful lot about the distractions, like you did, Sheila. The distractions, you know, the rebellion people won't do anything political, and other people. Oh, close. Oh, there I am. Yeah. So there's all these groups. You know, the Socialist Party won't talk to Socialist Alternative. It won't talk to the Socialist Workers and stuff like that. It would have been great if you'd have talked a bit more about Unite Community. My partner and I are in Unite Community. In fact, just before we arrived, he got his activist badge. So we're very proud of that. So Unite Community is the unions funding the misfits. You know, the people who don't fit into work, retired, mad, ill, slightly employed. All of these people have a place in Unite Community, and Unite Community in Leicester has, you know, you get that little bit of money, you get those meetings, you get some time. So we've started campaigning, and we're campaigning. So I don't know how grassroots this is, but we're pretty grassroots. You know, we're, you know, the infirm and everything else, and we're down there with our flags and our high-vis jackets in the pickets. You know, we've been picketing all over the place, we're there with campaigning. So we've now got a campaign to get a petition to remove the elected mayor. The elected mayor, a Tory idea, a prince who makes all the decisions and has done for the last 12 years, who just rules over our city. And we have to let people know about this, and we get little bits of money off people. You know, we can give bits of money to people. You know, we've got a little bank account. Can't quite get into it yet, but that's what we got. We got flags and stuff like that. And these things, they may sound little, but they're enormously invigorating. To have your own flag and your own high-vis jacket and your own bit of a bank account really does make a huge difference to what you feel you can do. I don't, you know, maybe we're not doing it. But we certainly do think we're travelling. So I just wanted to big up Unite Community.
Okay, there's two more. One woman here and a woman. Yeah. Sorry. Or maybe since you're passing her, give it to her. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. This is also a very quick reframing of question 2. Do grassroots need to have national influence? On what other levels could grassroots movements have influence? How about, for instance, local and influence on you know, city level, town level, county level, devolved administration level, just to put that in the mix. And thanks, everybody.
Okay. Sorry? No, I know. We just got lots. Okay. Because there's some women who first.
Can I speak? Can I? So we were talking largely about representation. We were also talking about dilution, and actually something that we often see is the fragmentation of the left and people duplicating campaigns and rather than working together and working collaboratively. And I suppose a kind of an example that we were talking about, because several of us here are involved in campaigning around Palestine, and obviously we've seen a national, in terms of the second point, how can the grassroots have national influence? Actually, I was 22 when I first went to Palestine and came back and started participating in activism. And since then, I've seen an absolute transformation in the faces of people that are leading Palestine campaigns and talking about Palestine in various platforms. When I came back, the majority of people having the conversation were over the age of 60 and were white and middle class. And actually since then, we've seen young people taking the mantle. We've seen Palestinians, we've seen young female hijabi Muslim women. And actually that has now spread, and more people are comfortable having conversations around Palestine. And actually that has had an influence in terms of the national and international discourse. So I think that's an example, because I do think an example of Palestine activism, people collaborate and they work together, and different campaign groups support one another, and that's something that I do think has been really strong. And so I suppose I just wanted to give that as an example of how important collaboration is, irregardless of what your ultimate objectives are. Actually, it's more important to collaborate in order to fight for social justice, work together, rather than dissipate that energy. So that's just one thing I wanted to flag.
No, that's a great example. Okay, so there's one man over there, and then we'll have to stop.
I'm really going to be brief, Hilary, right? What we were discussing is what can go wrong. Now, I'm not going to argue with James about what went wrong with Momentum 6 years ago, so we'll leave that. What can go wrong in a community organisation? I've been doing it for many, many years now, probably as long as you have, Hilary. Now, one of the things that can go wrong is you lose your way. So people have already said that. You have got to maintain the objectives of your organisation. But the other things that can go wrong is you can start having somebody who takes over your organisation who you don't have any democratic control over. You need accountability. And for accountability, there are 3 principles. One of them is openness. You have to know what the person you've appointed is doing for your organisation. They can't do things behind your back and secretly. Absolutely essential. The second is the right to say no. So that if the person you've appointed doesn't do what you want, you have an organisation, have the power to tell that person, no, we are not going to do that. Right? Other thing we need, not just individual organisations, we need people, we need people who could train up properly how to facilitate and help get these organisations sorted out. It is a difficult job to do. It's a hard job to do. It means you have to stand back and let people talk for themselves, all kinds of things. There is an art to it.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Okay, sorry to curtail it, because I know there are other people, but we will carry on this discussion. And also we've discussed with James from Progressive International to have a joint meeting with Red Pepper on the international experiences of this relationship between socialist grassroots and national organizations, particularly in Latin America. So now, just quickly, each of the contributors will make very short responses to your really good comments and questions, and then I'll get James to conclude. So, Sheila, or whichever order you...
Sorry, I see the people from Unite Community have gone now, and I think, I can have that conversation with them again. Unite Community, any community initiative is so important, but there are difficulties in terms of constraints imposed on you when you have to apply by union rules, which have been implemented for industrial sectors. But that's for another place. Some of the comments around, the guy down there saying about the relevance of grassroots organisations, and the man who's here, it's so important that, you know, for me, I think that the way people get involved is when it affects them. So the energy crisis at the moment is something where there is the impetus is there. People are struggling. People, you know, won't be able to pay their bills. You have a moral obligation, if you have a social conscience, to educate people around what they can do. And that is how you do it. The only way you will change and get people active at all is if they see the relevance of it on their individual lives or their collective lives. Someone asked the point, what is community? And I think that's really because, you know, say here we have people speak, well, I'm from the black community, for example. People will say, well, who is the black community? Is it a homogenous group who, you know, nominated you to speak on behalf? I use that just as an example. I think other people have made that point. What does community actually mean? But I think if it's based on shared experiences and shared problems, then that's the basis to move forward. And you have a job to set up community hubs, etc., and try and get people on board by giving them what they want. The rest will follow, but you can't start off by trying to get people involved when it's got no bearing on how they're going to pay the bill or the lecky gets cut off. Sorry.
I know we're super short on time, so I'm going to pass straight to you, James.
So Sasha, just very briefly.
Very briefly. So Chile has come up a little bit, and I just want to say that the movement that came up around the constitution didn't come out of a moment. It came out of decades of organising. And so, yes, I understand that there is an urgency and we need to kind of keep track of the moments that come up along the way, especially the cost of living crisis, but not to ignore the importance of the organising. It's not one or the other. It's every single aspect of that leads into each other. For example, another way that you can get involved is, like, another form of leadership is to kind of, in terms of community organising, is developing leaders that could end up in state power or in government positions or in the civil service. I mean, the left need more accountants, for God's sake, in all of our organisations. Like, there are lots of ways that you can actually participate from the community up. And the other thing that I wanted to say very quickly, and then I'll pass on, is that when it comes to looking at coalitions or federations, as you refer to it in the book, is that we don't replicate patriarchal structures again and again and again, because actually we've all been burnt by that before. So having a real look at how we embed feminist leadership models and methodologies into our organising and into our organisations and campaigns to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Great. So before handing over to James to conclude, I just want to say, to continue this debate, read and subscribe to Red Pepper and buy James's book. And thanks ever so much for coming. Yeah, and thank you to all the facilitators, also to the, well, to, where has he gone? To Tom for being like a kind of, and to Shazura, she's gone. And to Matt, and also to Lewis for tape recording it, well, videoing it. And to TWT in general. So, James.
Thanks very much. So, just building on what Sasha said about basically, and that I think that speaks to the question of the was it Dodo at the back? It's both and. Like, we can't just have the labour movement, we can't just have the environmental movement, we can't just have community organising, we can't just have electoral projects. They all need to come together. And I think, you know, because we do need state power. I write about that unambiguously, completely clearly in the book. There's we don't have the luxury of changing the world without taking power. Like, the climate is breaking down. We're having civilizational questions. People's lives are getting loads worse. Having control of the state is making a small number of people unbelievably rich. Like, there isn't an option without that. But the question is, how do you build up the forces that are strong enough so that when you do have a moment and a political vehicle, you can not only win elections, get into office, but then have a movement party that can then really carry out the fundamental reforms. So there might be a moment coming up right now. everyone can feel it in the country. Everyone's living standards are going down quite a lot. The reality that climate breakdown is coming is quite hard to deny. If you've had 40-degree heat in England, and if it was like 41 degrees in Lincolnshire, then people realise that climate breakdown's here. And like, you don't have to be smart to know that. Literally everybody knows that, because it is the straightforward, obvious material reality that people are facing. So we might be in a moment now. And for that, we do all need to do a lot and not replicate what we're doing and come together. So on Saturday, there's lots of things going on by loads of different groups. Some of them are talking to each other, some of them are not. But it doesn't matter whether they are or they're not, because we are all part of all of those groups, and we're all going to be doing all of those things. So on Saturday, the RMT are on strike, ASLEF are on strike, the CWU are on strike. Don't Pay campaign is doing protests, burning bills, leafleting in towns all over the country. Enough is Enough is going to have rallies all over the country, which are going to get announced. The Liverpool one's been announced, but the other ones haven't been announced yet. And a coalition organised by Just Stop Oil, Jeremy Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project, and others is going to be occupying Westminster, marching from like 28 different locations, swarming through central London, shutting it down, and then occupying Westminster. And there's probably loads of other stuff going on. People's Assembly are supporting that. Extinction Rebellion is supporting that. There's the Tory party conference the next day. People's Assembly are having a massive demo at that. There's loads and loads of things going on. So try to get to as much of that as possible. But when you're at it, wear as many different hats as I mean, you've got a lovely hat, so wear your hat. But, you know, put some logos on it, because all of our movements, they are all of our movements, and we can't win with one strategy alone. They all need to be brought together, and that is hopefully what Left Bloc could be.